You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of mindfulness and how it applies to your leadership game. My guest is an expert in that field. Her name is Pam Marcheski, and Pam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning. It's so great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to just kind of dive right in here because I am a big fan, and my clients can attest that I always talk about mindset and renewing of the mind, and the way we think is often the very key factor in how we show up. So explain from a high level what your approach and definition and process for mindfulness might be about.
You know, I so love the name of your podcast, right? The Common Sense, because to me, that really is mindfulness today in our society, in our world today. It's really a common sense approach to how you want to show up as a leader. What is your presence worth? How is your decision making and how is your strategic thinking? All of these things that are really important, these external things as a leader that need to happen. And we live in a really loud world today, and it's happening very fast, and there's very little boundaries. So I always say conditions times rate minus boundaries equal your mind state.
Say that again.
Conditions times rate minus boundaries equal your mind state.
Okay, that's an interesting view. Yeah.
So take a common sense approach to that equation, and you get honest with yourself about the conditions. How many conditions are you operating in today? And that happens to be a lot in a louder world. We're not a special time. It's just there's a lot. It's happening at a rate faster than we've ever seen before, a lot of the changes. And there's very little natural boundaries. 2 decades ago, your mind and your nervous system has natural boundaries. You go to work, you come home, you might yell at your dog or your partner or your spouse, but you wouldn't be connected at every level. You wouldn't be pinged and dinged and reminded of it. There was some space. Kids go to school. They get off the bus, they walk home. There's some space. Those boundaries are gone. They were probably the last of those boundaries. We've been losing some of those boundaries for a long time. Population growth, people living closer together, all the different things, right? But the natural boundaries, some boundaries that were there, that genie's out of the bottle and she's not coming back. So we know that, right? So, and people are dealing with a lot more demands in their daily life, right? Or the perception of it. And it's happening very fast. So take the equation and say, okay, how do I play with that equation? Or how do I pay attention? And that's where mindfulness comes in, is really just seeing it. Because mindfulness is really just an observation of thought without judgment, and being present to what's there without having to try to drop the story, and just learn how to be more present with ourselves. And we do that through the breath. And we use the breath as that place to come back to, because we know all the neuroscientists have done a great job of showing us that when we learn how to get present and really breathe into that we can slow down our prefrontal cortex and our nervous system. And in that presence, then we can be more responsive rather than reactive.
Yeah. You touch on that brain science dynamic, and we have talked about it before on this show, the notion that when we're in any way feeling threatened or pressured, brain scientists tell us we are moving more to that classic fight or flight mode. And there's a whole different metabolism, a whole different modality going on in the brain. And blood is literally pulled away from the frontal cortex, and it can't function as it should. And that's where our best work happens. That is where work happens. And so if that part of the brain is not getting fueled and energized, you're not going to do your best work. If you sit down and you feel like you've got a brain fog, there is literally a brain fog present, probably.
Yeah.
And there's something else going on that needs to be addressed. And so that mindfulness of starting with the awareness that you're off your game, challenging yourself with the idea, what circumstance is happening around me that's causing this this moment.
Yeah.
What can I do with it?
Yeah. Yeah. I love all the work that the neuroscientists have done because they are affirming what I think instinctively we've known for a very long time, but they've done a great job of showing us how the actual functions of the brain work. And they've shown us ways in which we can work with that in the current conditions. We're not going to outsmart our mind, right? But we can work with the conditions that we're in. And there are true practices that allow us, but it's a practice. And I think that's one of the things that I think it's important for people to understand is that it's kind of like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym one time and do a bunch of push-ups and think that the muscle of the arms are changing. And that's going to be it. It has to be something that you consciously do with regularity if you want the muscle to show up. And I think there is times, or I've seen even in the West in particular, where we teach it as like just the escape mode. That's a brain hack. You can pull it in occasionally, but the real power is making it a practice in your daily life and actually doing the practice at the easiest of times so that the muscle can work for you in the most difficult times. So
tell us a little more about that. What are you talking about there?
Yeah, it truly is finding formal and informal times throughout the day to practice mindfulness. So it's really sitting there, whether it's a conscious minute or two. It could be in the morning, could be in the afternoon. In my work, we give people tools to bring it in throughout the day so that they can see it as something that they regularly do, not something that you just do when you're feeling all agitated. Is it useful when you're agitated? Of course it is. Right? You can hack the brain to settle down in moments, but the more you get regularity to it, it just becomes automatic when you're going into that fight and flight mode.
I see. Well, another popular word among a lot of executive coaches, leadership development people is the idea of being intentional and encouraging leaders to essentially have a plan for the next step and look ahead and make their time valuable and being intentional. I think is very much a mind game, because in this crazy world, as you alluded, it's too easy just to show up, whether it's rolling into your home office and turning on the computer or getting in the car and going to another location. You get there and you just get busy, and you realize an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours later, you look up and you have that mindful moment and you say, did I accomplish anything? Did I move the needle at all? Or did I just answer a bunch of emails? What really just happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's call my company Intentions to Actions Leadership, right? So it's really, what are your intentions and what are the actions and how do you close that gap? And in a very loud, distracted world where you have things popping up, if you're somebody who works at home or works in an office, in modern times, right? You have email, you have those little bubbles that pop up with people grabbing at your attention. You might be wearing a watch that sends you some little energy. You've got things all around you. So if you want to be intentional, then you have to create some space for some strategy around that, right? And so it really is about building a strategy around how you go about your day to day. And if you think about intentions too, I think one thing I want to emphasize with leaders is, what's your motivation to your intentions? Because that's really important. When you really tap into what is your motivation and you're a leader, then you will create space. When you recognize that being a leader and you're getting the gift of getting to guide other people and support other people, then you need to create some intentions around that presence and some strategy around that.
So again, we're kind of beating this horse to death about the busy, crazy, volatile world that is always, it's loud, it's noisy, it's grabbing for our attention. What are some practical tips that business owners, business leaders can do to gauge all that, plan all that, be more effective, and have the right mindset at the right time?
Yeah, it's a great question. How do you make it practical and tactical in today's world, right? First, it's just doing an inventory, a non-judgmental inventory of everything in your life that grabs your attention, consciously or unconsciously. So if you really want to create more space and time, I tell people time has been time since the beginning of time. Nothing's changed about time except our perception of time and how we're using our time. And we have to get really honest about that. So what's grabbing your attention? Are there things, and it could be one or two things that maybe you dip a toe in the water and say, yeah, you know what? I may not think that I pay attention to my watch, but in fact, every time it goes off, I do see the light or I do feel it. Take the watch off. You know what? Maybe I don't need all those little reminders on my computer. Turn them off. Maybe, some conscious awareness around what you're going to do. Maybe I need to have a more clear routine in the morning so that it becomes easier when I get up in the morning. So my mind isn't always racing before I even get to do anything, right? So there might be some little things that you can do in your daily life to allow yourself to be more settled and present. And just looking at that and being honest about those things, what really, when you do that non-judgmental inventory, what is it that allows you to feel the most clear and the most settled so that you can be your best self for yourself and others? And if there is anything that you can remove it.
Mm-hmm. I've advised my clients who are presenting the idea that they feel a little overwhelmed and unproductive. I do challenge them with taking some baby steps to find time on their calendars where they will block out and as you say, turn off all the distractions, shut down the email account, turn off the instant messenger, phone, watch, etc., and look at the big rock elements that you've got to move in your work, your business, whatever, and invest 30 minutes, just do nothing but that thing to really do something impactful and meaningful toward generating progress. And in time, that creates momentum that all of a sudden those pings, dings, and buzzes aren't as significant as they once were.
Yeah. It's also, I think those are great suggestions. And also, it's not about just taking inventory of the things that maybe bug us, but also what when you're feeling good, what are those things, right? Like, when do you feel your best self, right? And just really starting to recognize that, because sometimes we have good moments and our brain only picks up on the negative because it's prone for negativity bias, right? So we have to be intentional of noticing, hey, that time felt really good. What were the conditions then that allowed that to happen? Repeat those conditions, right?
Yeah.
I think that if you focus on the stuff that in this time when you're feeling really good and paying attention to that, not just to the times when you're not feeling good, you will double down on that time, right? When we're consciously aware of it. So it's the good and the bad. We work with a lot of individuals where we give them tangible reminders. We do the M kit. We talk about the stop, drop, and roll of mindfulness. And, one thing we know is humans do what's in front of them. We like the tangible, and mindfulness can feel very intangible.
Mm-hmm.
So with the M kit, we really introduce people with tools so that they can get the stop, drop, and roll of it. And they have some actual tangible reminders that allow them to bring mindfulness into their daily life.
So give us some examples of that, if you will.
Sure. A timer, a 1 minute timer in front of your computer, and really consciously breathing, right? To take that timer and really set it aside in between meetings. It is such a gift to be present today,
Mm-hmm.
to be undistracted and present. And when you have the ability to really be present, you're really offering a really powerful gift. So 1 minute, even between calls, you can see that hurriedness and you settle the nervous system. That's a really powerful thing. I use compasses when people are feeling unsettled so that they learn to ground. We use the compass to hold and really sense into the body, because part of mindfulness also is really paying attention to what the body is saying, non-judgmentally. Judson Brewer, he's so amazing. And wrote so much about habit patterns and has done incredible work in neuroscience and psychiatry. And I love his quote. He says, the thinking mind doesn't hold a candle to the feeling body.
Mm.
The body feels everything. Right? And so when we can learn to ground and sense into the body, we can really breathe into that. And we can settle that nervous system.
That's a great statement. And I do know that so many of the business leaders I deal with, everything in their world is going on right up here in their head, between the ears. There's very little feeling to it. Although to see them show up in a moment, you can often feel or observe the stress and the pressure and it's showing up. The body is reacting to what's going on. And the leader's sitting there going, why isn't this working? Why don't people get me? Or why don't they understand what I'm telling them? It's like, well, my friend, you're a hot mess. Have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately?
Yeah.
You know?
I love that, what you said about up here, but I always, one of the quotes that I use is thoughts and emotions are what we have, not who we are. And so in mindfulness, we pay attention to them without judgment. And you learn to use language. So I have anger, I have anxiousness, I have happiness, I have sadness, not I am, or I am anxious, or I am rushed, or I am busy, because you make it part of your identity. And anytime you make something part of your identity, you attach to it. And when you attach to it, you want to protect it. And that's where the story starts. So when you can learn to be with what you're having, knowing that it doesn't own you and it will pass, just like all of the thoughts, all of the energy in the body, then it doesn't get to have a story. It doesn't get to have an identity. And when it doesn't have a story and identity, you've got nothing to protect. And you can be more clear with what you really need to do.
So I love the idea of that story that gets told, and it's the classic story we tell ourselves, call it the streaming reel in your head or whatever. But I think it's so important that leaders take time periodically to reassess that story. What are they hearing? What are they believing? What values and principles have they identified with and possessed, as you say? Because on one hand, someone who really wants to show up as an honest, genuine, effective leader with purposeful empathy and compassion and purpose, their story still may not work when it goes public and shows up at the job site. It something in a behavioral habit or pattern, maybe a vocabulary word or just body language or other things, create a gap between how others perceive the leader's efforts, and they go off and do something different. And the leader's sitting there going, what happened? I know I believe my ideas are truth, beauty, and light, but why don't people get that? Why don't they see this?
Yeah. Clarity today, is really about your own internal confidence. When you do the practice, you feel that internal confidence, and then you can show up and be present, right, with some clarity and some compassion and that calmness. And when we show up that way, then it's not about us. It's about the people we're guiding. So if you're in leadership and you're trying to guide others, it's not about you. So it's our responsibility then to show up as present as we can and be as clear and compassionate. And from that space, and it's not about us, we ask more clarifying questions to ensure, that it did land correctly.
Yep. Well, you just spoke another one of my favorite words, clarity. I've written about it. We've talked about it here on this show, that one of the most critical obligations of a leader is to create and provide clarity to those they lead and the organizations they serve, because as I frequently quote from the sales pages, a confused mind says no. And um, that applies to the sales game, the salesman talking to a prospective buyer, but it also applies to leadership and the people you may be trying to influence. When you spew your wisdom and knowledge and direction, what you think is direction, and you get blank stares, you got a problem.
Yeah. 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 What you emote, you promote.
Mm-hmm.
So if you show up as a leader and you are in the space, especially in a really loud, clamoring world where people have lots of demands, and you show up with some confidence, calm, clear, compassion, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think people do gravitate to that. And, part of that calmness is also being able to be your authentic self. I think a lot is written these days about how leaders need to think about that. And often in the work I do with executives and business owners, they sometimes show up and they want to ask questions. It's kind of like the classic, how do I be like Mike? It's like, well, do you really want to be like Mike, or why don't you be your real self? Mike may have some attributes that you relate to and resonate with. Okay, those are fine. Dial them into your leadership framework. Feel free to do that, but that doesn't make you aspire to be like Mike. That just says Mike's demonstrated a good attribute, so maybe I ought to explore how I can do more of that in my own leadership toolkit.
Yeah. The confidence part is really important. And really one thing that people can do is take an inventory of what throws you off your game. Who is it or what is it that makes you question yourself? And because when you start to question yourself, that's when your confidence is a little bit shaky. And people have real life demands, whether it's a boss, whether it's a client, right? And so really just paying attention to is a lack of confidence there, right? Like what's making it so that you don't feel like you can show up calmly and clear, right? What's triggering that defense mode, right? And not denying it. I mean, there are some people, that I work with that they have very high demands. I can talk about this all day long, but they have people of influence in their life, that they cannot ignore, right? So then how do we work with that? We have to see that sometimes certain things trigger us that set us off our game. And how do we want to respond, right? Not just react and give in.
Right. Well, and all of that is very close to, or may exactly be, this notion of the imposter syndrome. Somebody gets elevated into a role and quickly they start having fear and doubt about it. And, or as a client just told me, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it does, I think, bring to mind the question of, okay, well, what made you doubt where did you lose your confidence in this moment? What about this situation? Kind of back to your equation on circumstance. What about this circumstance makes you doubt your ability and, your preparedness and fit for this role?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you are somebody that leads other people, you have a responsibility to pay attention to how you might, in your actions, incorporate some doubt. For example, in today's world, it's very easy to send out a text or to send out a quick email and somebody could be focused on something that they really need to be getting done, right? And so is that necessary? I think leaders owe it a responsibility to take inventory of how they communicate with the people that they're leading to ensure, are they creating the right conditions so that their people can actually get the results that they're looking for. right? So part of it is organizations and leaders really taking an inventory too on what have my actions been?
Mm-hmm.
What do I actually expect when it's meeting to meeting to meeting and text after text after text, on video, on video, on video, right? Are we literally spending money, as an expense as a company doing that, or are we really creating and investing and letting people do their work?
Mm-hmm. Related to that, I'm reminded of a scenario that I introduced to some clients a few years ago. And I was in an environment, this was what I would call high science, high technology, and all the teams were very smart people up and down the organization. And leaders had a tendency to just walk out into the team and ask a question, and it might be pointed at an individual, and the individual would scramble and give an answer, and then the leader would turn around and walk back to their office. And you could see the look on the employee's face. It's like, what just happened? Why did I get asked that question? Gosh, does this suggest we're going a new direction? And any clarity they had just kind of went out the door. So I suggested to the leaders in this group, I said, would it be possible? I know you guys are wildly curious, so your questions they have no edge to them at all. You're just one of those very inquisitive minds collectively. And why don't you bookend your question? And maybe you say something like, I'm working on a report for so-and-so. I'm curious about this aspect. You get your answer, and then you bookend it on the backside saying, perfect, that's all I need. We're good. Thank you. And you at least put some framework around this question so that the employee doesn't have to start playing a mind game with themselves about what does that mean? Is there is there a hidden agenda here that's coming up?
Yeah. I learned that early on in my career and in my previous career. And, I spent decades in retail and visiting stores. And in my last role, I'm out visiting 186 stores. And I had to recognize that while I might not think I'm a big deal and I'm just visiting, as the leader of that region, I had to pay more attention and really be intentional about saying, I'm going to say a lot of things and some of them might just be dumb, right? I see a lot of things and offer suggestions and ask questions. But I had to really think about making sure I left with the landscape of do what you feel is right in here, right? Because you're responsible for the results, of these four walls. And we have to lay that level of trust in that environment. Sometimes that's hard, can't always do that. But for the most part, it really is that. Because there have been times I would go back, a year later, there's 180 some stores, right? So maybe a year later, oh, we did this because you said so. I'm like, is it working? No. And I think, oh my goodness, right? Somewhere along the way, I didn't do my role. I left that environment where there was this idea that they had to do, what I might have thought. And I have to own that.
Well, it's funny you say that, and what flashed up in my memory bank was my days in the military, and I do not know that this still goes on. I hope it doesn't, but there was a time when if a senior officer was going to be visiting the installation, the base, there would be a ridiculous number of silly things that would happen in preparation for that. And literally on the base I was at, there was a bit of a rock garden thing, and rocks would get painted. And
Believe it.
And of course, paint outside in the weather gets ugly and stale after a while. And so if there was a new 2-star, 3-star general going to make a tour, there would be this mission to go out and paint some rocks and get everything polished up. And we had one leader one time that was scheduled to come from the Pentagon and do a tour. And he said in his memo on the trip, he said, I don't want to see freshly painted rocks. He actually called it out.
Love it. I love it. I love it.
So it's a waste of time and energy and resources. I don't want to have any of that going on.
I love it. But you have to mean it.
Yeah.
So, what happens in corporations today is that oftentimes people will say that, or, at the highest level, don't go in there and, expect all of these things. Then you need to respond with compassion and clarity. So if you say that and you show up and you see things where maybe they're not right, then you have to not let that be the last moment for that person, right? So you have to mean it. And I think there's inconsistency sometimes. That's where the intentions and the actions come in, right? And so I love the fact that he said that, as long as they meant it, right?
Yeah. Well, in this case, he did mean it. And in fact, there was one unit who violated that directive and painted their rocks, and there was a different kind of discussion. So because they were doubtful that he really meant it. And so to your point, he made it a point to talk to the commander, and he did it professionally and privately. It wasn't a public thing, but he told the guy, he said, did you not get the word? I can tell these are freshly painted, brand new. And why did that happen? I know that's a tradition, and I don't want to see that on my account ever again. And, yes, sir, I got it.
Yeah. So that's the intentions and the actions, like really owning like what your intention is, but then really taking those actions, right, in a clear, kind, and compassionate way, right? Because there's some kind of doubt in there where they felt like they still needed to do it.
Yeah. Well, Pam, this has been good. I think we're about up on time for today. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Yeah. Well, I have my website. It's intentact.com. I know you'll probably put that in the notes there. I'm also on LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. My website, LinkedIn, and then Pam at intentact.com is the best way to reach out to me. I'm excited. At the end of September, the Mindful Leadership Summit is in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of really rich content and great speakers, and I'm getting the honor to speak at that summit as well. So people can register and come out to Washington, D.C. as well. I find it ironic to be in Washington, D.C. in the midst of election time, and doing a mindful leadership summit.
Let's don't go there.
It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be a wonderful summit. Yeah.
Right. Well, good for you. And yes, folks, as always, we'll have that contact info in the show notes. So if you're out walking about or driving, listening via your favorite audio streaming, don't forget to revisit the show notes and get those links if you're interested in hooking up with Pam and learning more about her Intent Act programs. And with that, Pam, one last time, thank you for sitting in. Really been a blessing.
Thank you. It's been a joy. Yes, be well.
And with that, folks, we're going to wrap up. I do like to remind you, we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. There's also a whole new archive and library of shorts and reels that we're publishing, taking excerpts from these shows and putting them out in more bite-sized packets for you. So take advantage of that. And I hope to see you next time. For now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.